Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this community conversation. My name is Erin Mintzberg, and I am the District Director for Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. The Congresswoman and our panelists will give opening remarks in a moment, and then we'll move to question and answer. On the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A logo. At the bottom of the webinar screen, there's a Q&A little symbol. You can click on that and add your question into the queue. And once we move to Q&A, I will call names out and unmute you, and you can ask your question yourself to the group. So with that, I will hand it over to Congresswoman Fletcher.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin. And thank you to everyone who is with us today as we mark 4 years since Hurricane Harvey. It is really hard to believe. I was looking out my window just a few hours ago, watching the rain come down over here and thinking about what it was like 4 years ago today. And of course, now I have my eye on developments in the Gulf, as I'm sure many of you do as well. And I know that this time of year has and always will involve a hurricane watch. And that's why I'm so glad to have this great panel assembled tonight to talk with us about what we have done in our community since Harvey, what we're working to do right now, and what we still hope to do in the future. And I am really glad to be joined by 3 people that you all have come to know, I'm sure, as I have, and who I've had the privilege to work with as your Congresswoman. Colonel Timothy Vail from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the commander of the Galveston District. Alan Black, Harris County Flood Control District's interim executive director. And Steve Costello, the City of Houston's Chief Recovery Officer. So thanks to all 3 of you for being here and sharing your thoughts and being available to answer questions from the residents of Texas's 7th Congressional District. You know, I don't have to tell everyone here, but I do think it's worth repeating that Harvey was one of the worst storms in our country's history. $125 billion in damages, more than any other disaster in U.S. history other than Hurricane Katrina. Across our district, on the west side of town, people suffered tremendous damage during Harvey, and for some people, it was the 2nd time their homes had flooded in as many years, and for some, it was the 3rd, as we also know the Tax Day and Memorial Day floods. And you know, this was true from Jersey Village to the Memorial Villages to Meyerland. And you know, many folks who are here with us tonight and many people across the district still worry that could happen again. Every time we see rains like we've seen this year, we see hurricanes out in the Gulf, and you know, we remember what we saw and what we experienced. And you know, here in Houston, right, you don't have to say hurricane before you say Harvey, because we know what it is. And we also know what we saw in the immediate aftermath of the storm. We saw our neighbors coming together to help one another in really innovative ways, you know, with just incredible caring and compassion, from rescuing people in boats to feeding people in shelters and mucking out houses. We saw what we can accomplish when we come together. And it's critical that we apply these lessons in our continued efforts as we prepare for future storms. How we manage the threat of flooding and our recovery from natural disasters will shape our region for the future. And so that's why I'm so glad to have all of you here tonight. We have been and must continue to coordinate at all levels of government in order to be successful. And we have all worked together. I've had the privilege of working with folks from the city, the county, with federal officials and elected leaders on both sides of the aisle to make sure our region gets the resources it needs for recovery and mitigation. To implement policies that will allow us to respond to disasters better. In fact, the very first bill I introduced in the House came from a discussion that I had with Steve Costello about some of the barriers we faced after Harvey and the challenges. I was so proud of that bill because it was really just born in our district. And also working together to rebuild in a smart and strategic manner. So I've been really grateful for all of your partnership in this effort, as well as the partnership of this community. And before I turn it over to you, I wanted to give just a very brief overview of some of the things we're doing in Congress to help with recovery and resiliency efforts, just to give that kind of update from Washington. And I guess it's an update from Houston too. This summer, I was really glad that I got to announce 2 major FEMA grants that will be provided to Harris County Flood Control, specifically for Harvey recovery efforts. $36.7 million to repair Addicks Reservoir channels and $9.8 million to repair the Barker Reservoir watershed. As many of you know, Addicks and Barker were built to reduce flooding risks along Buffalo Bayou, but Harvey deposited large amounts of sediment along the banks, and this federal funding will be used to restore the reservoir and channels to pre-Harvey design, capacity, and function, helping protect homes and businesses in our district. Also, just this week, I've just returned from Washington, where we in the House voted to begin consideration on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that invests in resiliency infrastructure, providing funding that will benefit our region, including there's $7 billion to the Army Corps of Engineers for resiliency infrastructure projects, including set-asides for coastal storm risk management and hurricane and storm damage reduction projects. There's nearly $10 billion to the Army Corps for waterway infrastructure priorities, including more than $5 billion for backlog construction projects, and specific funding for repairing damages to Corps projects caused by natural disasters. There's another $3.5 billion for FEMA flood mitigation assistance to provide financial and technical assistance to states and communities to reduce the risk of flood damage to homes and businesses through buyouts, elevation, and other activities that we are familiar with here in the 7th Congressional District. And as some of you know, and I hope Evan Mintz is out there listening, I've also advocated for more dedicated funding for coastal resiliency projects like the Texas Coastal Spine that we'll hear probably a little bit about from Colonel Vail as well, also known as the Ike Dike. It's really important that Congress knows the national significance of our region and of this project that's been long in the making. So I'm really glad to report on that, as well as that working with some of our local leaders here and some of the folks on this Zoom meeting, I was also able to obtain funding this year in Congress's annual appropriations legislation for key projects relating to stormwater detention and conveyance, including nearly $10 million in funding for the development of the Meyer Grove Detention Basin. And that's located at 610 and Braeswood, will help protect against flooding there in an area that has been repeatedly flooded. So great work with the team here, and also a special shout out to our council member, Abby Kamen, for her work on that project as well. And I just feel so lucky to have these great partners here. There are a couple of other projects that we worked on for improvements in Bel Air and Jersey Village, and we'll be talking about those a little bit more this week, but things to improve stormwater conveyance in Bel Air and Jersey Village as well. So I should note these projects still have to pass the Senate. One still has to pass the House, but I'm very, very optimistic. And getting them in the bill was the critical step. So I'm really excited about that. And before I turn it over to the panel, I want to comment on one more development that I suspect you are all aware of. But like many of you, I was shocked and outraged earlier this year by the Texas GLO's announcement that neither Houston nor Harris County would be awarded any of the disaster mitigation funds that Congress sent to Texas after Harvey. Out of $1 billion they announced that they were awarding, Houston and Harris County would get zero. That's the opposite of what Congress intended when it allocated the funds after Harvey. And I want you all to know that our congressional delegation, along with our city council members, our county commissioners, our delegation to the Texas legislature, are all standing together to ensure that Houston and Harris County get our fair share of the funds. And just this week, the GLO posted an amendment to this mitigation state action plan for these funds. And it is for a federally required 30-day public comment period. Among the changes, it does award about $750 million to Harris County, but it leaves the city of Houston out entirely. So there's much work to be done here. My team and I are reviewing it right now, and I intend to submit comments on the proposal to make sure that Houston and Harris County get our fair share. And I encourage you all to comment as well. Throughout my time in the Congress, I have been able to work in coordination with the city of Houston, with Harris County Flood Control, the Army Corps, working with them to identify and facilitate these important projects. And I'm really grateful for the partnership that we have among all of us. And I think it is exactly the message I want to bring to Washington about how we here in Houston work together to solve problems. And I think you'll be pleased to hear from our panelists about the work that they're doing right now and that they have done in these 4 years since Harvey. and of course, over a much longer period of time as well, to protect our community, to keep it safe, and to mitigate damages from flooding and disasters. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I'd love to ask Colonel Vale maybe to go first, and then turn it over to the other panelists. We'll get an update from them, and then we'll turn it back for your questions. Thanks so much. Colonel Vale?
Thank you, Congresswoman Fletcher. Just really appreciate you hosting tonight's session. It's great being with you, and it's great being with my additional teammates. It's good to see Alan Black and Steve Costello. It really looks like the dream team here in terms of everybody that I know lives and breathes trying to get at reducing our flood risk across all of Harris County and Houston. It's great being with them largely because we recognize that it does take a team working together. Just as how we responded during Hurricane Harvey was an all-hands approach to response. Ultimately, long-term recovery is that same all-hands approach, where it's going to take a comprehensive intergovernmental and interagency approach to really reduce flood risk across the 22 watersheds across Harris County. I think most of us know, most of those participating tonight, you either know me or know of me in the Corps of Engineers. We largely oversimplify things sometimes, which is kind of unique for an engineering organization. But quite simply, why is it flooding, and why is it flooding so much across Harris County? Really gets at the two issues that we struggle with every day as the Corps of Engineers. Either the ocean gets angry and decides it's going to come ashore, or we just can't get the runoff to the ocean fast enough. Or in the worst case scenario, it's a combination of both. And that's really what we're constantly struggling with and what we're trying to overcome as a collective to get at comprehensive resilience. And I'll touch on both of those potentially through the evening. But quite honestly, while projects matter, the most important thing going forward is to continue to mature our governance, this team approach when it comes to comprehensive flood resilience. As it stands, if you didn't know, there's more than 1,000 agencies or entities with either funding or authority to deliver a piece or pieces of a comprehensive solution across Harris County, but no one agency has the authority for it all. But we're seeing great strides and great opportunities every day. Since the Texas legislature provided the authority to the Texas Water Development Board to establish regional flood planning groups, it gives us an opportunity to plug into a state level entity that's got a regional focus specifically for Harris County that helps us with our planning and prioritization purposes. At the same time, the Corps is delivering the Metro Houston Regional Watershed Assessment as our effort to build a sustainable exchange of information and knowledge to get us all 1,000 of those agencies and entities to really fight off that same common operating picture of problems. I'm personally extremely proud that the Army has incredibly close relationships at the federal level with the Texas Water Development Board, with the General Land Office, with our congressional offices, and our county commissioners, so that we can continue to help identify those authorities that are going to need to get at a comprehensive solution set. Very specifically to the Corps of Engineers, our engagement with the public, not just through our partners, but also through the public at large, has really been instrumental in informing us specific to the federal authority on the Buffalo Bayou watershed. And as most of you know, we have taken a tremendous amount of public input, both from advocacy groups, economic development groups, and the private citizens to really take a hard look at what's the best way to move forward on the Buffalo Bayou watershed. And we're moving away. We're moving away from what we've proposed in the interim report based on public feedback. And right now, we're seeking permission to really adopt a significant amount of that input that we received publicly. And we're seeking permission to extend kind of the study to really adopt and incorporate most of that public input that guides us on our study of the Buffalo Bayou and its tributaries going forward. And that's going to mean we're going to extend our study period, but it'll allow us to really incorporate all of that valuable feedback that we've had today. So as it stands, we've asked permission to extend that study to December of 23, and we've intentionally coordinated with Harris County Flood Control District to have them do the engineering analysis for the biggest pieces of public input that we've received, which is to truly evaluate a tunnel rather than a complete above ground expansion of the existing Buffalo Bayou channel, but really a tunnel to allow us to convey water to the ocean faster. And at the same time, we're exercising all the authorities we already have to partner with local groups, local communities, so that we can free up space in the reservoir, so we can increase that capacity and potentially reduce the rate of rise and decrease the frequency of water leaving government-owned land behind that reservoir. So those things are moving forward with a serious commitment from the Corps of Engineers to be part of that solution set with our partner in Harris County. And then at the same time, we're about to finish and submit to Congress the final Chiefs report for the Coastal Texas and Resiliency Study, in shorthand known as Coastal Texas. Most of you refer to it as the Coastal Spine or Ike Dike. But we're very excited that we've got a comprehensive resiliency study that gets at the whole of the Texas coast, that places a premium on engineering with nature, looking at our ecosystems, how to restore our ecosystems to provide the greatest amount of resilience going forward. And at the same time, not shying away from building out some of the more substantial infrastructure that will really protect the city of Houston and Harris County from a substantial storm surge event going forward. Happy to talk or answer any questions about that Coastal Texas study. But probably most importantly is we're on a good timeline for authorization of the Coastal Texas projects within the next Water Resource and Development Act by Congress in fiscal year 22. And we're moving ahead, full steam ahead for project implementation. We still have the General Land Office, who will be the Corps' partner for delivering all of the ecosystem restoration components of that project. And then the Governor Abbott signed the legislation to create the Gulf Coast Protection District that had its very first meeting last week and signed a letter of intent to be the non-federal sponsor for the bulk of the coastal storm risk mitigation features associated with that project. So we're excited. We have different authorities to move the project forward as early as next year. And we're excited about that opportunity taking place. With that, I'll probably stand by for most questions, but just want to thank everybody for having us tonight.
Thanks so much, Colonel Vail. Alan, do you want to give us an update?
Of course. Hello, everyone. Good evening. And thank you, Congresswoman Fletcher, for the invitation to be here. Thank you as well for your support and your advocacy for all of us up there in DC. Now, as you might imagine, we've been extremely busy. That's not to say that we've got a monopoly on being busy, because everyone else speaking here tonight has been too, if not more so. But I'm extremely proud to say tonight that every single project in the flood control bond program has now been initiated. That's $5 billion worth of projects. And recently, with Commissioner's Court approval of the Flood Resilience Trust, we now also have the certainty that all of our projects will be completed, even for those where a planned partnership doesn't materialize. Now, I do need to explain briefly what I mean by initiated. So the average project life cycle at flood control from inception to completed construction is somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Some projects have only just started that cycle, but at least they're all started. In planning and executing our projects, we always have an eye on the short term, the midterm, and the long term projects, and that's why I wanted to dig into a little bit here. In the short term, we're already well underway with our $40 million effort to restore capacity to channels upstream of the Addicks Reservoir. And the awards that Congresswoman Fletcher just recently mentioned regarding additional sediment removal will help to complement that even more. Now, the midterm includes planning, design, and construction of projects that we do all around the county. Locally, that means widening and deepening channels like Bear Creek. And also includes excavating large stormwater detention basins, such as one that we're working on over on 529 near Barker Cypress. Now, in the midterm, we're also coordinating with the Corps of Engineers on various efforts. As Colonel Vail mentioned, we've been meeting regularly, and the two of us just met on Friday with Commissioner Ramsey to discuss how we can move forward with excavation of additional conveyance volume within Addicks and Barker reservoirs. So as he mentioned, there is more to come there and more to come relatively soon. Looking to the long term, again, working closely with the Corps as they wrap up the Buffalo Bayou and tributaries resiliency study with the intent of moving forward with that actionable project. When he talks about us moving into the phase to look further at our exploration of large diameter underground stormwater tunnels, that's really to complement and to continue the efforts that we've had underway locally, looking into the technology. Does it work in our soils? Can we make that work hydraulically? Do we have enough fall across the county for the water to actually flow out to the ship channel and the bay? The short answer is yes. And so we're ready to start taking those next steps. And so part of that discussion with the Colonel and Commissioner Ramsey discussed how we can start federalizing that study and what we've accomplished so far. It will take a lot of time. It'll take many years to get where we need to go eventually, but we have to start somewhere. And the close coordination we're having with the Corps of Engineers is fantastic, and we really look forward to continuing that partnership. But getting back closer to today, the progress that we've made at the Flood Control District so far on the bond program has been tremendous. Since Harris County voters approved the bond, our construction projects have removed the 100-year floodplain from approximately 11,000 homes and businesses, and we're only in year 3. So there's a lot more to come and a lot more projects to put in the ground. Finally, I'll close with my usual public service announcement, and that is to please get flood insurance. If you live in Harris County, you are at risk of flooding. Pay attention to the tropics. There's a lot of activity out there right now. But while hurricane season is from June to November, flooding season in Harris County is year-round. So please go out and get your flood insurance. Thank you again for having me here tonight. I really look forward to the continued conversation and the questions y'all may have tonight. Steve, I'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you, Alan. And Colonel, it's good to hear from you. It's always welcoming when we have our partners here. And Congresswoman, thank you for putting this together. I'm going to be very brief because I want to get to our residents' questions as quickly as possible. But today we had City Council. The mayor gave a 4-year report on the status of the activities of the city relative to Harvey recovery. For those who are on this call who don't know who I am, I'm Steve Costello. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer for Harvey Recovery. My role is to get into a lot of people's mess kits and kind of move projects along. That's both internal and external. I do appreciate the partnerships that we have with Harris County Flood Control District and Harris County, as well as with the federal government. And we do appreciate everything you do for us in advocating for that in Washington. Just a really quick summary. The difference between Flood Control District and the City of Houston is, the way I categorize it is regional flooding, flood damage reduction, and versus urban drainage. So our role is to get the water to the facilities that the county manages, and then hopefully they were able to convey it further downstream without potentially damaging anybody. So a real quick summary, we have spent nearly $780 million in drainage improvements since Hurricane Harvey in reaction to some of the drainage and flooding. Some of it is outside of the congressional district. We spent over $120 million in state and federal funds up in the Kingwood area in dredging in Lake Houston. We've completed a little over 140 projects inside the city limits. But I think what's really kind of unique is the future projects that we're working on, our hazard mitigation grant projects, which are really flood damage reduction projects with partnerships with Harris County Flood Control District, TxDOT, and our local TERS. So your residents can be assured that it's not just one entity working, we're always working together to solve flooding and drainage problems. So I'm going to stop there and let's get to the questions as quickly as possible. Thank you, Congressman.